Hello everyone and welcome back. So in this video we're going to kind of follow on from what we did previously in the CSV data table tutorial. And the reason for this, I wasn't actually planning on doing this video, but I've been working recently with a lot of this data stuff, and what I'd found is that there's no inbuilt system to save out CSV files or JSON inside of Unreal. And I do remember being asked by someone at some point whether this was possible and how to do it, and at the time I didn't have an answer, but I've now had a reason to look into this. I've spent some time and I've got a small solution for this. So I'm going to run through that, a simplified version of what I've been doing. And also just to mention that some of this logic is coming from the Rammer Victory plugin. So if you haven't checked that out already, then definitely go ahead and download that. There's loads of really handy nodes in there. The only problem is that there's like 100 plus different nodes, so it can be a little bit larger than it needs to be if you only need one of these functions. And it also makes your project kind of version dependent, at least with regards to when Rammer's plugin was last updated. So what we're going to do is create our own class to manage just the saving out of text from the project. So I'm currently using the project that I finished on previously on the previous video. So it's just a simple actor class called data actor and a single CSV file that I've imported. Now to do this, we do need to run this via C++. It's only a very small amount of code, so just follow along and this will definitely work by the end. But unfortunately, there's absolutely no way to do this in Blueprint that I'm aware of. So you do need to kind of bypass some of the logic in C++, but then we can call that in Blueprints. So to get this started, if we go to File and create a new C++ class, we want to go to Show All Classes because we need something called a function library. And the one that we're looking for is the Blueprint function library. You can do this in other classes, but by putting it in a function library, it means that any class within our project can access this, so it just makes it a little bit easier to use. And for this kind of very generic, almost macro-like function that we're going to be making, it just makes sense to have this accessible by any class that might need to call this printout to text function. So if we create a new Blueprint function library, press Next, and we'll just give this a name. I'm going to call this one Text File Manager. With that done, we can make sure that that separates into the public-private classes and hit Create Class. Okay, so with that loaded, that can take a little while depending on your system, obviously. The first class has now been generated, and we should start in the header file. If you're not here, then just go over to the textfilemanager.h. And as I said, very simple. There's only going to be a few lines or a couple of lines that we need here. So what we want to declare is our function. This is going to need to be a U function so that we can call this in Blueprint. So start with the U function. And inside of this, we need this to be callable via Blueprints. And after this, we want the category. So I'm just going to give this a custom category. This bit's not too important. And then we'll give this a meta specifier as well. So we'll just say meta equals keywords. And we'll say this equals save. Okay, so next we're going to declare the function. So this needs to be a static Boolean. It's going to return whether or not it's succeeded, and we're going to call this save array text because there's two different ways that we can do this. We can save or print out just a single string of text, or we can just make a slightly more comprehensive function which will take in an array. That way, if you only need that single string, then you can just have a single element array. But of course, it gives us that flexibility then that if we want to add different columns or rows even, then we can use the benefits of the different elements in an array. So we're going to call this the save array text, and there are several arguments we want in here. So the first thing is an f string, and I'll call this one the save directory. So this is where we will be saving the file. We want the file name, so this is going to be an f string as well, and we'll call this one file name. And then we want a t array. Again, this is going to be of type f string, and this is going to be the text that we're going to be printing out, so save text. And then finally, whether or not we want to allow the file to be overridden. So this is just an optional thing, but it was quite handy, so I've kept this in. And we'll just call this allow overwriting. Okay, so that is our function declared. We can take most of this because we're going to need to put this in the CPP file. So I'm going to go over to the .cpp. And in here, before we add the actual function, just going to add the two includes that we need. So we need to, first of all, include the file helper. So we'll say include, this falls under the Misc folder or the Misc directory, and then it's called file helper. So this is going to help us to actually call some built-in functions to the engine to allow us to access the directory of the project and to save files out. And likewise, the other thing we need is to include, and the directory is HAL, H-A-L, all in uppercase, and this is the platform file manager. And of course, make sure you take a second to copy this down exactly as I've written it here. This is all context sensitive, so make sure you have the same casing and everything, capitalization. Okay, so the function that we want to write is going to be our Boolean, and then we can just paste in everything that we copied from the header file. Of course, we want to prefix this with the name of the class, so add a space there. And this is a U class, so U text file manager. And then we'll call this, give this a pointer to the function that we've just declared. And a couple of things we'll want to change here. Just one is that we just want to give this a default argument for the overwriting. So we'll default this to be false. So we'll just add that in. With that done, we can then add our parentheses and we can start putting in some of the logic. So the first thing is going to be the file path. So just add a quick comment there to say what we're doing, and this is going to take the save directory, and we want to first of all add in the backward slash, and then on top of this we also want to get our file name, so we'll add the file name to the save directory. So again, we'll do a plus equal file name, and that means that's ready for use. Then we're going to do a quick check whether or not we are allowing the file to be overwritten, so we'll say if isn't allow overwriting. Then we're going to check whether or not this file already exists, so we'll say if the platform file manager, which is why we added the include at the top just now, we want to get, and we want to get the platform file, and we want to find out whether or not the file exists. Then we're just going to point to the save directory. So this is why we've filled this in just up here, so that we can do an immediate check to see whether or not this file, including the file name, already exists. And then if it does, then we're just going to return false for the success of this function, because we're not going to be able to save this array to a text file because it already exists, and we don't want the user to be allowed to overwrite that. So if that isn't the case, then that lets us move on to actually printing this out or saving this to a file. So I'm going to say fstring, and we'll just call this final string, and we'll say that this equals to nothing to begin with. Just need to make sure this is populated with some value. It's just not a null value. And for each of the strings in the array, so we're going to say for fstring, use the ampersand, and each, we want to save text. We'll get the save text. And then what we want to do is the final string is going to be itself plus the current version or the current string in that array. And then after each of the strings that we're adding, we need to add a new line. This is going to allow us to add our different rows into the CSV file. So we'll say final string again, plus equals, and this is a built-in function, and it's just line underscore termination. Sorry, line underscore terminator. Okay, so with that done, we're now ready. We have our final string ready to put into a text file. So we will return the function. We're going to return this with f file helper. So this is the other include that we've used at the top, and we want to get the function inside of this called save string to file. And what we want to save inside of this file is our file string, which has been had all of the text appended and formatted correctly, including the extra lines. And then we want to put this into our save directory. And that is it. So that is now our function, which is going to allow us to print the text that we provide via the blueprint into a text file in the project. So if we make sure that we save both of these classes and go back over to the engine to compile this, and we'll just double check that we haven't made any syntax errors, and then get straight onto the blueprint, and we'll add the functionality into the blueprint. Okay, so I did get a compilation error, and it's just saying that the platform file manager is not a class or namespace. And I think this means that the functions afterwards aren't being called because it doesn't know what it is. So just go back, and I think all it is that we need to put an F in front of the platform. So it should be F platform file manager, and then get, and then the same as we've done already. So I'm just going to go back and recompile this. Okay, same again, just another little typo I can see is here. That should be an uppercase S just here. Now, I always leave these in the video just in case you're following along exactly and you think that I've got the syntax correct, so you followed the incorrect spelling. So I'm just going to keep these in so that we can see that all we need to do is come back and use the uppercase F and uppercase S for the F string. Again, I'm going to go back though and recompile and see if we have everything working now. Okay, and one final one, we've got the file string now, so we're narrowing this down. And all I've got here, I've not actually got a variable called file string, it should be final string. Okay, so of all of those, we should be able to compile, and this one should definitely work this time. Okay, that is great. So all of that has gone through, and we have a successful compile. So what we can do now is if we go into our blueprints, if you followed along from the previous CSV loading video, then just go into the BP_data actor. If not, then just make a standard actor class, just something that you can put into the world in a moment. So this is what we're doing previously. We're actually printing everything out from the CSV file we've loaded in. We don't need that at the moment. What I'm going to do is on the event begin play, I'm just going to call this function that we have in C++ now to print out a string or an array that we give it. Okay, so to do this, remember that we called the function save array text. So if we find that first of all, we should have our custom namespace that we have, which is what we put in the ufunction properties. So that is our save array text. And we have our arguments we've added in. So on event begin play, we're just going to call this the save directory. I'm just going to put this in the projects directory. So there's a node to get this, which is just get project directory. And you've got a few different options here. We can put it in the content folder. I'm just going to use the very root folder, which is the project directory, and we'll plug that in there. We want the file name. So you can do something clever like using the date or the time. And to do that, if you wanted to, you just say now. So there's a now function. We can break the now function down. So if we right click on the blue node, on the blue pin, we can split the structure and you get things like the year, the month, the day, hour, minute, seconds, and milliseconds. So if you wanted all of the files to be slightly different, you can add the hour or something onto it. Just for simplicity though, I'm not going to worry about appending that into a string. I'm just going to call this our test CSV, or we'll just call this test, in fact, just nice and simple. Now, the important thing here though, is if you're adding any of these, if you're appending any strings or anything to this, do make sure that this is where you have control over the file type. So if you wanted this to be a plain text file, then you just add .txt for a text file. Now I'm going to be showing you how to get this as a CSV. So I'm going to add test.csv to this so that this will save it out as a CSV file. This just means that if we wanted to load this back into something like Excel or even back into another project or this project, then we can load this in as a CSV file like we've done previously inside of our data folder just here to be used in the structure class. And finally, we want the text that we're going to save to our file itself. So I'm just going to right click on this and promote this to a variable, and we'll call this the file text, because remember this is going to be an array so that we can add in the number of elements we want printed. So really, keeping in mind that we want this to be a CSV, I'm going to add two different elements and we need to do one row per element. So if we take a look back at our weapon values, the first row would be the name, damage, speed, weight, and info. Second row would be the sword. So let's just take that so we've got something simple to go with. And just to check that this works, getting it in and out of the project as well. So remember, this is all comma separated. We don't need any spaces or anything. So to make sure that this works with the correct context, we're going to say name and then comma and then damage and then comma, speed, comma, weight, comma, and info. With that done, obviously the logic, the way that we set this up in C++, after the first array, so it's gone through the for loop once, it's going to add our line separator, so we don't need to do anything here. All we then want to do is we'll put in the sword's information. So we'll say sword, comma, 6, 4, 10, and we'll just say sword again to keep this nice and short. Of course, all separated by commas. And if we save that now and hit compile, that's pretty much everything ready. So we've got the directory chosen, we have the name of the file that we're going to expect this to print out in, and the text going into that file. So if we hit compile and save, all we need to do, remember if you haven't already, make sure you've got a copy of the data actor in the world. I already have that from the previous video. So now on event begin play, we're not going to see anything happen, but that has just printed the text to a file. So we can find this by right clicking on the content folder, go show in Explorer, and then just go one folder up, and we can see here we have our test.csv. Now this can quite easily be opened in Notepad, so I'm just going to do that, but I don't want it always to do that. As I said, if you had Excel or something installed, this would put all of this in the correct cells inside of the spreadsheet. But as it is, we can see in the text editor that this is working perfectly fine. So we've got everything printed out as we wanted. Now the next test is to be making sure that this works in the engine. So I'm going to go back to the data folder, I'm going to right click, and I am going to import the new test.csv. So it should notice a CSV, which it does, which means it's going to give us an option to add our structure. So I'm going to try the weapon structure again, because this should work. If everything's gone through correctly, it should have the correct information and the correct rows and column definitions, which it did, because nothing here has come up with a warning. So we've not added the other weapons, but you can see that we've got the damage, speed, weight, and info all populating in the correct place, which means we have pretty much created a function to quite simply print out a CSV file. Now, this is only a CSV file because I've added the .csv to the end and very meticulously appended or set up this in a way to be read as a CSV structured file. Of course, if you wanted to just print out information in different ways, you're going to have to come up with, depending on the use of this function in your project, you'll just want to play about with different ways to append this. So when I keep saying append, what I mean is we've got the append node inside of Unreal, and you can of course then get the text file array, and we'll add this to the array every time you do something, every time if you're recording data or something. Every time that you record a new bit of data, you may want to record the data 1, data 2, and then the next time something happens, you'll add in your data 3, and so on. And this is how in a kind of full-fledged project, the sort of thing that we've been doing at the moment, this is how we can add data quite dynamically on the fly, save it into an array, and then print this out at the end. Obviously, this is just a quick demonstration of how you do it by hand. But hopefully that's useful. As I said, quite a handy function. A lot of things to look at in the Rama Victory plugin. Definitely take a look at that anyway, but I just thought this was really useful because it's not really been shown anywhere apart from that, and it's quite handy as a function to have by itself. And as I said, although a little bit of C++ is required, very simple, and this means that you can upgrade your project regardless without needing to worry about the current version of somebody else's third-party plugin. So hopefully that's proven useful. I'm going to leave that there for today. As ever though, if you have enjoyed the video or find it useful, then please do leave a like and share the video around. Remember that to be kept up to date with any of the content coming from any of the playlists on the channel, don't forget to hit the subscribe button. And as ever, thanks for watching, and I will see you all next time.